Good morning. Welcome to Composer Panel number 2 for the CBDNA 2013 National Conference. We are very fortunate as composers that all of you support us. It's a real hallmark of all of these CBDNA conventions is how many composers you have here and how many you perform. And we all, I think, speak up here that thank you for that. We have 5 composers and only 50 minutes, so I want to get right to it. I'm going to ask each one of them to introduce themselves and talk a little bit about the piece or pieces they're having or have played here this week, as we usually do. And so I'll start down here in the end with Joel Puckett. We'll work our way across.
Hey everybody, I'm Joel Puckett. I teach at the Peabody Conservatory in Baltimore, Maryland. And I'm really excited to be here. Ecstatic to be here, actually. To be traversing these waters with these really fine composers. The piece you're going to hear tonight is a brand new piece called Short Stories that's a string quartet concerto. And anytime you're dealing with string instruments or just concerti in general, but concerti for wind ensemble or the solo instruments, you have to deal with the inherent balance problems. And I've written a number of these concertos now where I have developed certain strategies to try to keep what I want in focus. And I realized that over the last few pieces I've had begun to develop certain strategies that I felt were becoming a little crutchish. So when I came to this piece, I decided that I wasn't going to use any of my go-to methods of keeping things thin. So no 2 5-octave marimbas, hallelujah from the chorus. No 2 vibraphones. So I came up with 2 solutions to replace those 2 guitars in the very back of the ensemble, pre-tuned, that outline the structure harmonically of the piece, and they all have capos, and then hit the guitars with various things to recreate that kind of resonance that I was looking for with the 2 vibraphones and the 2 marimbas. And as far as the piece goes, it's in 8 shortish movements, alternating textures, always keeping the timbre fresh throughout the whole thing. So it's really a dialogue about, friends sitting around a campfire, telling stories to one another, a story as old as the Algonquin Round Table. So I'm really excited about the piece, and I hope y'all really enjoy it.
Hello, I'm John Mayrose. I'm an assistant professor at Indiana University South Bend. I'm really excited to be here too, mostly because this is really my first band piece that was premiered yesterday. And I thought instead of talking a whole lot about that piece, I might talk about some of my background and my approach to it, because I think, unlike a lot of the composers here, this being my first time out, there's a lot of stuff that I had to deal with. Most of the music that I've written is largely for a group that I'm in that has 2 electric guitars, 2 electric guitars, drum set, and then double reeds and piano. So it's this kind of eclectic instrumentation. And a lot of my music is derived from this using electric guitars and this kind of popular music influence. So when Andrew Mast, Lawrence University, asked me to write a piece for him, my thought was, how can I try to make the band sound like an electric guitar? One of the things that I did for that was a lot of, if you think about electric guitar, a lot of the effects that we use are things like delays and distortion. And so a lot of the orchestration I did was to try to mimic distortion. A lot of the textures that I derived was using kind of delays. So if, say, clarinet was playing something, then it was played almost maybe an 8 note later by another clarinet and then by a flute. So you get these kind of really thick textures. The piece itself is similar to a lot of the music that I've written, where I derive these really concrete systems, usually derived from either concepts from mathematics or from physics. And in this case, I was thinking about the idea of light as it passes through different medium. White light, when it passes into a prism, gets separated into the color spectrum. And I kind of used the frequencies of the color spectrum as kind of the harmonic modeling for the piece, as well as the way light changes in that. So it was a really exciting performance, and I'm really excited to be here. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Joel Balzan. I'm currently finishing my undergraduate degree in music composition at Biola University, just outside of Los Angeles. I had a piece performed by the CCM Wind Orchestra on Wednesday night on the doubleheader concert that opened the conference. It was the middle piece in the concert called A Missing Generation. It actually started out as an orchestra piece. I wrote it 3.5 years ago now in response to a trip that I went on to Cambodia. And in preparing for this trip to Cambodia, we learned about the history of Cambodia and talked a lot about the Khmer Rouge, which was just a brutal, essentially, reign of terror in the 1970s. That was sort of like the second Holocaust. And so the piece was sort of my response to how that shaped Cambodia. If you've ever been to that part of the world, you might have found that there's a generation gap. There's a lot of people under 20, and then there's, or even up to 30, and then from 30 to 60, the population is extremely low because that population was near eradicated during the Khmer Rouge. And so there's this sort of hole in the demographic, and so that's where the title "A Missing Generation" came from, is that there's this big hole in the demographic in that part of the world. The piece was selected for a reading session with the Calgary Philharmonic while I was still attending the University of Calgary. And through that, it actually got performed at their annual New Music Festival. And then Glenn Price asked me to arrange it for him and the University of Calgary Wind Ensemble while he was still there. And they've recorded it on a CD that should be coming out sometime soon. I don't know. The piece is based off of a Cambodian children's folk tune. We went to a lot of orphanages while we were there just to visit and spend time with them. And they, in return, they would sing us songs and just, perform for us because they're little kids and they like doing that. And so the first piece, I think, or the first song that they sung for us, I think it was maybe about a mango tree. It was just something fun and silly. But the melody was just very, very, very bare bones and simple. And I wanted to eventually create a songbook out of these folk tunes that I heard, and that's still something that I'd like to do. But that was the source material for the piece, was this folk tune. And so it sort of became a theme and variations on this one folk tune that permeates the melody the entire time, or permeates the piece the entire time. I chose to use only one melody to represent the fact that during the reign of the Khmer Rouge, there would have only been one ideology that was acceptable, and anything else would have been shot down and stifled. And so you might have heard in the piece on Wednesday night that there were these ideas that started to surface, but they were cut short immediately. And that was all on purpose. None of them were wholly developed until maybe near the end, towards sort of the climax of the piece, if you will. When Dr. Price asked me to rewrite it for Wind Band, I was allowed to make a few tweaks. So there were some things that I eliminated from the original orchestral version and some things I added, especially in terms of color. I had a lot more brass and a lot more percussion available to me, so I think those colors spoke really well, and I think that's sort of the main feature of the piece. So hope you all enjoyed it. I'm very excited to be here and able to meet more of you over the next couple of days.
Hi, I'm loud. Wow. I'm John Mackey, and the piece that I wrote is premiering tonight. It's called The Frozen Cathedral. UNCG is doing it tonight. And I was out here about 2 years ago, I guess it was, and the Wind Ensemble was recording a piece of mine called Hymn to a Blue Hour. And when I was out here, it had been determined that UNCG was going to be hosting CBDNA, and John Locke, the director of bands, asked if I would ride with him to dinner, and I thought, whatever, okay. So we were in the car, and he said, would you write a piece for our CBDNA concert in 2 years? And I was like, absolutely, because that would be awesome. And they're awesome, and they're great, and I liked him. I thought, this will be really fun. And he said, just a couple of things that the piece needs to do. And I'm like, bring it on. So he says he wants it to be the greatest closer ever written. And I thought, that sounds like John Locke. So just humor him and say, absolutely, it will be the greatest closer you will ever have heard, ever. I can totally do that. In my sleep, no problem. And he said he wanted to use extra forces. He didn't know what that would be. He didn't care if it was like a drum circle off stage or, like marching piccolo players. He didn't care. He just wanted something to make it even bigger. He wanted something extra. And I was like, fine, I can give you a big closer and I'll find something to give you that's extra players. And, so it needs to be a piece that really, like, at the end of the thing, you're like, woo, we love you, yay, like one of those pieces. So I'm like, I can totally do that. And he said, and one more thing, it needs to be written in memory of my son, JP, who died about 10 years ago. And I thought, I no longer know how to write this piece. Because as a policy, I have always refused commissions that are memorial pieces. Because I don't think, if I didn't know the person personally, I don't think it's fair to that person's memory. I don't think it's fair to the people who knew and loved that person. And I don't think it's fair to me I just would never be able to deliver a piece that is worthy of another human being. So I thought, I can't write that piece. And I went home and I talked to my super, super brilliant, amazing wife, Abby, who's coming tonight for the concert. And we talked about it, and she said, well, what is it about JP that you can make the piece about him and have it make sense and not be so obsessed with necessarily specifically what can be more abstract about it? And things that John Locke had said, the main thing that stuck with me was that JP loved Alaska, Mount McKinley, the Denali National Park in Alaska, and he loved spending time there and spent summers there. And so first Abby said, well, write a piece that's just about Alaska as a place. Like think of maybe the topography of Alaska. Write a piece that starts in the depths of Alaska and then comes up from the water, the depths of the Gulf of Alaska, and then comes up and it's on the plains and it goes up the mountain and yay, it's a big happy ending. But everything I was trying to write sounded really sad. It was all like I have now a half an hour of very slow, very sad music, and that was not going to work for this program. So she said, okay, stop thinking of it like that. Try to think of something more uplifting, if you will. So she said, what is it about mountains that speaks to people? What is it that draws people to these enormous, stone and ice things, this natural things? What makes us want to climb those and be around them? And she said she thinks that people are not a religious thing, but searching for a sort of spiritual transcendence, maybe. And maybe that's what JP was looking for in wanting to be around this mountain. And so she said, write the piece about a huge mountain that would draw people to it because of this transcendence they're searching. Think of the mountain like a church made of ice and stone, and call it the Frozen Cathedral. So the piece should sound, the idea was, as soon as I had the title then, which normally I write the piece, then she titles it. In this case, she had the title, and from that I wrote the piece. Because as soon as she said the Frozen Cathedral, I kind of knew what the piece would sound like. And it needs to sound huge and with tremendous mass, but still ethereal. And for the extra forces, once she said, the title, the extra forces that he'd asked for, I decided to use antiphonal percussion. It's antiphonal metal percussion that surrounds the audience. And they play primarily like twinkly, sparkly sounds, like light reflecting off of snow and ice is what it's supposed to be in the beginning of the piece. It's about 14 minutes long. The first 4 minutes or so is very slow. And then the end of the piece is a little bit faster, but one challenge of it was to write a piece that made you just really want to leap out of your seat, and the piece never gets fast. It's quarter note 100 that's the fastest it ever gets. So it's a different sort of piece for me that way because there's no trash can. There's no Kevlar marching drum, like none of that stuff is in there. It's just, it has motion and pulse, but never like, wah! So I hope you enjoy it.
Hi, I'm Paul Dooley. Baylor played my piece Point Blank last night. I'm from University of Michigan. I'm a lecturer there and a doctoral candidate, almost done with a degree. I just thought I'd talk a little bit about the genesis of my piece. It sort of centers around this group called Alarm Sound. They're a new music group based in New York, and they became well known originally for a CD they did of Steve Reich's music around 2002, but their second CD, I believe it was acoustic arrangements of the music of Aphex Twin. It was called Acoustica. And a lot of composers know about this album. I'm obsessed with it, but basically they took the music of this electronic artist, Aphex Twin, who's a UK electronic artist, very hyper drum and bass music, very intense sonic effects and drums going on all the time, and they transcribed them for their ensemble. They're a 15-person chamber ensemble, and they released a CD of about 10 of Aphex Twin's tracks, and they are incredibly virtuosic. The album is incredibly recorded, produced. Everything is totally amazing. And I heard about this album from other composers around 2003 or 4, somewhere around there, and immediately purchased it and got really obsessed with it. Just studying the things they did to recreate these electronic sounds and drums and everything. So in 2010, I was asked to write a piece for Alarmo Sound as part of this Missouri New Music Festival. That was the inaugural year, and they've been doing it every year in the summer since. So I was thrilled, obviously, to write a piece for them, and I couldn't think of anything else to do other than write a piece sort of in that style of the Aphex Twin stuff they did, but it would be my own piece. So I studied some of their scores. I talked to some of the musicians in the band, because a lot of them had done the arrangements of the Aphex Twin themselves. So I did a lot of research and just thought a lot about the piece, and actually wrote it in about 3 or 4 weeks after thinking about it for months and months and months. And they premiered the piece in 2010 in the summer. It was great and everything. And then the next summer, I expanded it for full orchestra, a winds and two orchestra, smaller brass section, but bigger than Alarmo Sound. And that was premiered at the Cabrillo Festival in August of 2011. I revised about half of the piece. The whole middle section, for those of you that were there last night, the whole middle section, I think, got transposed up a half step, and it allowed me to modulate in a better way when the big drums come back and the timpani solo and everything. I get to this, I really wanted to get to D minor at this one spot, so I had to figure out the journey through the harmonic material to get to that point. And then the whole second half of the piece is different from the original version for Alarmo Sound. It builds to this big climax with the bass drum and everything. And so that was great at Cabrillo, and I was very lucky that Gary Green happened to be there at the concert in Cabrillo. This was actually a composer's workshop, a young composer's workshop in Cabrillo. It wasn't even part of the main festival there, the New Music Festival. So Gary Green from the University of Miami was there and heard the piece and asked me to do a wind version of the piece. So I spent the next, I think, 4 or 5 months working on it and sent it to them, and they premiered it finally in last October. And I worked very closely with Mr. Green. I went down ahead of the premiere and worked with the ensemble and made changes, and he was very helpful and made a lot of great suggestions about orchestrational effects and pacing and some meter changes and all sorts of things. So it was a really great collaboration. So that's sort of how Point Blank came to be.
Great, thank you all. A theme that sort of seems to be emerging here is these different approaches to this ensemble and transforming it in some way. And it sort of demonstrates how malleable the wind ensemble is. And I think that's something I know I've really grown to love. Adding instruments, transforming its sound, trying to evoke completely different sounds. And I thought I would ask each of you to talk about how you would want this ensemble to evolve, change, what else you would change about it, or add to it, or subtract, and not just instrumentation, but the infrastructure around it and the way it's set up as part of universities, this sort of thing. And I don't have a specific answer I'm looking for. I'm just trying to foster some discussion in this whole area. As a composer, this tool for making sound, what would you change about it that would entice you to write more for it and really make it true to what you want. Because you talk about, in John Mayer's, you talk about trying to evoke electric guitars, and that sort of, it sounds alien to the ensemble, trying to graph it on. So, anybody have any thoughts that we can start put on the line, or if anybody wants to jump in? Paul, you're up.
Sure, I'll start. Yeah. Well, lately I've been thinking a lot about electronics, and I've written a fair amount of electronic music, but I'd like to somehow figure out how to incorporate it into the wind music that I'm writing. And I talked with Stephen a little bit about this on Wednesday night. Because obviously he's already accomplished that feat very well. It's really a lot to think about. So that's what I'm thinking about, how the electronics relationship with the ensemble, how to keep them out of the way of each other, how to blend them together. And I would hope down the line that it would be more standard to have live electronics in the ensemble. And I think it's becoming that way. But I don't think that electronics is like the future. It's just something that's very possible right now. The technology is there. We have this great software, and the computers are powerful enough to do these real-time effects. You can have sound going through a microphone, getting processed through a CPU, and played out the speakers all within 10 milliseconds, which was hard to do even maybe 10 years ago with just a laptop. So the technology is there right now, and I think you'll see more of that happening down the line.
What was that, John? No, I'm the moderator. You guys have to go. I did my time.
Yeah, this notion of the electronics coming in, and like Paul, we have very similar educational backgrounds, and so they require us to do a lot of electronic music as part of our training. And just that training changed the way I think about construction and the way I think about putting things together gesturally. And so, much like Steve, I grew up in the back of a band room because my dad was a band director. And so the sounds of the band informed at its most fundamental level the way I conceive of sound. But then when you add on this training, I realized pretty quickly that the greatest thing that the wind ensemble and the band world has going for it is the just huge amount of people power that is available to you. And so in a piece like my flute concerto, I imagined that the soloist on stage has a pickup mic with 6 speakers in the back of the hall placed all the way around. But rather than doing that electronically, I took advantage of people power and placed individuals all around the hall. Still thinking about it as if it were electronic, but maintaining a human element that I think is important, at least for me. So I think that that's the real shift, that all of us have done things with that electronic model in mind, and then that'll change how we recognize sound.
I'm trying to decide if I have something to say. Yeah, I mean, just the forces that you mentioned, I think, is something that's very cool. And that was something that I consciously tried to do in the piece tonight. Is there are 2 large solos for bass flute in this piece, because I love the sound of the instrument and have never heard it in a wind ensemble piece before. It turns out for good reason. If you write a bass flute solo in a piece that has 75 players, you have to be very, very careful how you score everybody else. And I thought that would be a really cool challenge. Because you have these huge numbers of players at your disposal, if you only have a couple of players playing at a time, it forces, especially, and one of them is a bass flute, the audience has to really lean in to listen, because you can bring dynamics down so much with a band. And I think that's something that's not often explored, particularly by me, is quiet music. So it was fun to write something so whispering quiet that could then, by the end of the piece, just be deafeningly loud. And it's just so nice to work with an ensemble that has access to things like bass flute and alto flute and 10 percussionists in this piece, and You know, this is a school obviously with needs. That's not always going to be the case where there will be 10 percussionists who can read music, but here it's not a problem. So it's amazing to have that kind of opportunity, which I think is certainly neat to the ensemble, and it'd be great if 10 percussionists and bass flutes were standard in band, but the main thing I wish there was more of is low instruments. You know, low instruments that play quietly would be great, but there's not so much of that. I wish every school had to have a B-flat contrabass clarinet, because a contralto clarinet is not a contrabass clarinet. All right, I'm off my pedestal now.
If somebody else wants to jump in, or we can move on.
I mean, one of the things that interests me a lot about the band, or my perception of it, is that bands can do rhythm really well. You know, we often think that, I think of a lot of orchestra music that's really rhythmic. Sometimes it feels like it drags, and band music always feels like it's lighter and faster in that way. Coming from my background, you know, I feel bad about this, but when I was in high school, I was the punk rocker who looked at the band kids and was like, you know, I'm too cool for this. I've got my electric guitar, and you know, so when I started thinking about the band, I still had some of that kind of connotations, and I started going to a lot of band music, mostly in college and grad school, and was like, this is really great music. This is really exciting stuff, you know, and getting audiences to you know, I don't know how many of them are like me in high school, but really, you know, showing the great music that's being written today and a lot of the great music that's coming out of the band world. It's really exciting.
One of the things that I enjoy about writing chamber music is that everything that you write becomes extremely exposed. And I think one of the other pleasures in chamber music today, especially for composers that aren't afraid of the instruments that they're writing for, is that they'll find new ways to use the instruments, just in different extended techniques. Even in a song cycle I'm writing right now for soprano and chamber ensemble with, it has an alto flute in the ensemble, and I'm experimenting with everything from just quarter tones, maybe more standard things, to ghost tones, ghost glissandi, and these other effects I didn't even know existed until I started doing a little bit of research on the flute. And I think that's something that I would like to see in the future of band music, is these otherworldly effects just become not necessarily a standard part of the language, because then they'll just become jaded so quickly, but that as composers, I think we need to be finding new sounds on the instruments that we're given, not just necessarily looking for new ways to emulate different things, but we already have such a gamut of colors and sounds to choose from, and there's different ways that we can manipulate them that we still haven't yet, through just different things or different ways to use the instruments.
Great, thank you. One thing that I always tell young composers when I'm speaking at universities, especially ones who have not written for WINS, is that I really think of it as a large new music ensemble these days with infrastructure behind it. There's a lot of you out there with the same enthusiasm, but you just have a lot of forces. And that sort of changes the way, suddenly you see this change and you compose like, oh, okay, yeah, you could write for this and do all sorts of things. Anyway, I don't know if that offends anyone, but that's how I think about it now. All right. This is your chance to do a little ad for everybody. I want to know what you think your best piece is, or the one you would really want to share with this audience. And I'm not talking about just a wind band piece. Anything you created, any genre. What if you had to pick something representative and you could force everyone here to listen to it? What would it be, and where can they hear it? It's your chance to share who you are musically with them.
Well, the best piece is the next one, I hope. But I honestly don't know. We're usually not the best judge of our own successes. You know, at Ned Borum, I'm sure many of you have read the Paris Diaries and the New York Diaries, but there's a quote in the Paris Diaries where he says that the worst thing a composer can realize is what they're good at, because then all they want to do is that, and they exploit it over and over and over again. So I'll tell you what I think my best piece is, but I want to preface it with I have no idea what I'm talking about. So I'm particularly fond of both the Shadow series, which was recorded by the great Mike Haycock and the Michigan Band and Recorder, and also by Jerry Junkin and the Texas Ensemble. And both of those are shortly available. Mike's is right now, good iTunes. And I do like this morning, the piece for the orchestra and chorus, which is sadly unavailable. But send me an email.
I agree with your statement about Composrs Forum, the best pieces. I would probably say if there was one that was most representative of me, it was a piece I wrote, I'm not going to say how long ago, called What Hath God Wrought, which was based on the first Morse code message sent from Samuel Morse from Congress to Baltimore. And I took the Morse code, which was I forget after that. I mean, that's about an age. And I of course, I used it to control rhythm, but I also used it to do pitch. And over the course of the piece, it's kind of the message kind of gets formulated, and it gets kind of sent through various means, and then it gets kind of decoded at the end of the piece. And the instrumentation of this piece, I mean, it's a very bright, very excited piece, is electric guitar, electric bass, oboe, English horn, bassoon, piano, and percussion. It was recorded by my new music group, Pulse Optional, and it appears on our album and my website.
Yeah, I definitely echo Joel's statement, or the quote from Ned Moore, Roarin', we don't know or we shouldn't know what we're best at in some ways. And so I guess I'm coming at it from the perspective of I've just applied for grad schools, and my composition professor advised me on what some of my best pieces were. So knowing that, I think and these are two pieces that I'm definitely fond of myself as well. 2.5 years ago, I wrote a chamber orchestra piece called Miracle 100251, and it won the Young Composers Prize from the National Broadcast Orchestra of Canada, and was broadcast on CBC Radio, and there's a recording of that available on my website. I think it's a really fun piece, and I think it perhaps might be a testament to what I was talking about earlier in terms of transforming wind instruments. And the other piece that I'm particularly fond of that I've written is a piano duo that I'm still working on because I'm adding electronics to it. It's a 26-minute long, sort of big, one long line journey sort of piece that starts out very spacious and intimate, and eventually grows to something quite large. And I think it's going to be a really effective piece. So I'm excited to see how it turns out.
The piece of mine that I most want to hear is tonight's piece. I think it actually is. I think it's my best piece. I'm so close to it now that it's hard to judge, and often when a piece is my newest piece, that's my favorite piece because I'm not sick of it yet, and I'm most excited about it, and I haven't heard it played badly yet. So when it's new, I'm like, yay, but sometimes when it's new, I'm like, oh wow, I don't know if that piece is good, and I'm always right about those. If it's done and I think it's bad, I'm right, it's really bad. This one I think I'm really very excited about, and part of it is the program that it's on. I think John and Kevin have put together a great program that's shaped really well, and mine feels like it's part of this whole picture. And so I think that adds to what it feels like to hear the piece in the context of the whole program. So don't tell me if I'm wrong, but I think this is my best piece.
Yeah, the best piece has to be the most current one, the one you're working on. You have to be struggling and subverting your own expectations about what you're doing. Because if you're just like using your technique to write a piece, you're not going to be inspired, or the piece is just not going to come together. So that being said, my most recent piece I finished about a month ago. It's called Run for the Sun. It's for the New York Youth Symphony, and they're premiering it on Sunday. So I'm going to go there tomorrow, actually. And it's an 8-minute orchestra piece. It's a concert opener. It's sort of a chase scene through Manhattan at dusk. That's the main idea for the whole piece. It's very exciting, but I worked really hard on it. It was a huge struggle. Barely got it in on time. But just working on it and struggling, and after they started rehearsing it, I completely rewrote the ending. I was very fortunate they were open to letting me do that. So it was a great struggle, but it was all worth it. So I'm really excited for the new piece. That being said, one other piece I'm really fond of is a solo cello piece I wrote. It's called Gratis. And it was the first piece I wrote when I switched my composing method to a sequencer. My teacher, Michael Doherty, composes in a program called Digital Performer, and I thought I would try it myself. So it was the first piece where I completely changed my method of getting my ideas into the computer, just getting them down. And anytime you just completely uproot everything you're doing, I think it can either just lead to a huge roadblock, or but in my case, it was really, really powerful, and it just changed my way of thinking. The piece is totally like linearly driven, and I haven't really written a piece like that. I wasn't really thinking tonally or harmonically or anything. It was just, it's a completely different piece than I've ever written. And being that it was written in the sequencer, you might think it could be a little more square with less meter changes and less tempo changes, but it was exactly the opposite. I really learned the program and learned how to move the bar lines around the music I was writing and adjusting the tempo and all these things. So it was really powerful. It was a new way of working, being able to drag the playhead over the notes. And, sometimes I'll get ideas, just I take my composition and drag the playhead over real fast. I was like, oh, that sounds cool. I'm going to try to orchestrate that. I just love working in the software. So the piece was a lot of fun to write. So I'm really happy about that one.
Cool, thank you. That's actually the software I use a lot too now.
Yeah.
Talk about it. It's a lot of fun. Okay, we have about 10 or 12 minutes left. Are there any questions for anyone up here? Yes, Dr. Long.
Since you, even though you're moderator today, since you have a premiere this evening, some of these people may have missed you a couple of days ago, you might say a word or two to explain
Sure.
the unique part about the electronics and the recorded sounds.
All right, I don't escape after all. Just asking about, I also have a piece on tonight's program, premiere commissioned by UNCG, and it's, as Paul mentioned, it has electronics involved with it. And it's not my first time to rodeo with electronics, though I have to say it's going to be take many more iterations before I feel like it's comfortable. This work is called Solace, and it's a dark, somber work. I try to really integrate the electronics even more seamlessly than I did with Ecstatic Waters, a piece I did about 4 years ago. And I sampled a number of the players in the ensemble, which you may or may not notice. I try to be very subtle with extending just kind of the tendrils of their sound, extending far beyond what most people have breath capacity for, things like that. And then there's some moments that are quite obviously electronic, and the contrast and the power from that. And the work is also, I consider, absolute music, as I was telling everyone on the panel on Wednesday. It's all built from a single 9-tone row, which, if you know me, is not my normal way of working. But lately, it's become more of this approach to systematic processes as the source of a piece, and building an entire work out of a very small amount of material has become an obsession of mine, even more and more with each piece. This one takes it to an extreme. All 13 and a half minutes are from this single 9-tone row, and it really doesn't even deviate or transform that much, or at least not the usual Schoenbergian transformations. So anyway, I'm eager to share that with you tonight. Thanks for asking that, John. Any other questions for anyone up here? Yes.
I'm curious for any of you guys, what is the next piece you're dying to write that you haven't had the chance to write, maybe for wind ensemble or other mediums?
The question is, what's the next piece you're dying to write for any medium, not necessarily wind ensemble?
Well, I'm a big believer in Oprah's dream boards, so hey, you should try it. So a few years ago, actually it was at the Obama inauguration in 2008 when they played the John Williams Simple Airs, and I heard this clarinet player I'd never heard before, and Anthony McGill, and he blew me away. So I put a picture of him on my dream board, and I ran into him 2 months later because he had just started working at Peep. I just ran into him in the street. Turns out that he was an alumni of the Chicago Youth Symphony, where I was serving as composer in residence, and all that I say is I, of course, wrote him a concerto. So now I put on my dream board that I wanted to write an opera, and 2 weeks ago I got a phone call. We took a meeting last week, and I think that that's going to happen. So put your dream boards up, friends. Put your dream boards up.
I don't actually know if I have an answer for that question. I'm excited about almost anything. I guess the one thing, the project that I've been working on every year I come back to it and then something else comes up and I have to drop it and come back. It's doing a lot of work with interactive electronics. I've done stuff with the Microsoft Kinect, which is a video game controller that can trace your skeleton and you can control anything with your hands and your feet. And I keep working on it, and then I work with some new media people, and we get about halfway through the project, and then both of us get another kind of commission that we have to work on. So coming back to that, eventually working with dancers is
Yeah, I'd like to write an opera, definitely. I'm a singer, and so love opera. I'm going to be in production of Schikiki in Italy this summer, so opera is definitely something that has become near and dear to my heart over the past year, so I would love to write just a really effective opera. Also, the theremin is very intriguing, and I'd like to experiment with that some days, the theremin. So if any of you are looking for a piece for theremin in an ensemble, I have business cards. You can come find me after the morning.
I should buy a theremin. Yeah, that's so random. I think on this panel in Austin, was that 4 years ago? Was Austin 4 years ago? I said that what I really wanted to do was write a symphony for winds, and that is the next thing I'm doing. So it took like 4 years to finally put that together. So this summer into the fall, and hopefully not too far into the fall, or they will be concerned, I'm writing my first symphony for a band for Junction and UT. And they'll premiere that next February at TMEA, and then they're doing a big Asia tour in summer of 2014, and that'll be the big anchor piece on their tour. So I'm really excited to finally do that, but terrified that now I actually have to do that because I've been talking about it for so long. So.
I guess just to follow up on what I said about the electronics, what I really want to do specifically is take some of this percussion material that I've already done, like in my piece last night, and figure out a way to get it to work electronically, but with percussionists actually playing electronic percussion instruments. So you can have all sorts of really amazing electronic sounds, but they're performed. And so the conductor retains complete control over the ensemble. So just doing that is a big challenge, but that's really what I'm focused on. And I don't just want to recreate acoustic percussion sounds in the electronic drums. I want to, because that would sort of be pointless, but the idea is I would like to be able to control the volume of the percussion with more detail, because like in my piece last night, you just have to be so careful, because if you get the drum set going and the snare drum going together, it just can completely annihilate the whole band. And I want to be able to do all that very intense percussion, but also have very subtle colors going on in the winds and everything. So I'm hoping this might work out, but doing it with electronic percussion where you could have very intense, loud sounds going, but you can turn the volume down on them, right? This is the volume knob. You have more control over the orchestration, so that's something that I really want to explore this next year.
Great, thanks. Actually, I love that idea, Paul. Fortissimo is a characteristic rather than just a decibel level. Jake Wells.
Aside from anything musical, what do you guys draw inspiration from that helps you in your creative process, in the development of anything that you're working on?
My life, like what I'm reading, my kids, the area around my house, my family, like my older family, my parents, that sort of thing. But yeah, I find it very much from the things that are around me.
For me, it would be mostly physics and mathematics. These are things that I kind of wish sometimes I had pursued. So most of my reading and research is in that kind of stuff, so I draw systems from that. I also do a lot of computer programming, and it seems weird that kind of controls how I think about music, but it does in some way. There's something about that thought process that when you apply it to music, I don't know exactly how I do it. It feels more conceptual than maybe actual, but been a big inspiration?
It sounds totally cheesy, but those of you who know me well, this is true. My wife is by far the biggest, most critical person. Yeah, we really do collaborate on all the pieces that I write. She doesn't just do the titles, but she does all the titles. But she also, we talk about structure while I'm working on it. She's not a musician; she's a philosophy student, but she's brilliant. And so, without her helping me to shape the pieces while I'm working on them, my music would not be nearly as good. So she's, I think, more than anything else. And so I'm excited for you all to meet her later tonight.
For me, music is about responding to things around you, like Joel said, and to things that you encounter. And so for me, it's just about finding things to respond to, whether it's life experience or reflecting on some other past experience, or if you encounter something, whether it's a work of art or an event that you just find especially intriguing. For me, it's just about finding something to respond to.
For me, it just depends on the piece I'm writing. Lately, I've been trying to decide on a theme before I start writing the piece. Sometimes I'll do the same. I'll title the piece after it's been written. But lately, for whom am I writing the piece, and what's it going to be about? So I recently wrote a piece for the Detroit chamber winds and strings, and I was looking around Detroit for inspiration. Obviously, the most clear thing is Motown or the auto industry. But I also discovered there's a massive Detroit salt mine underneath the city that just hundreds of miles of roads, like underground tunnels, and I think billions and billions of tons of salt. This is whole underground thing, like right underneath Detroit. So I just embarked on a huge research project, and that was a lot of fun. And I asked older folks that had actually been down in there. I talked to my grandma who used to live in Armada, Michigan, and she said, oh yeah, it used to be like a World War II bomb shelter, or like an emergency thing. So all this was just incredibly fascinating, so it really got me in the mood to write the piece. So just doing little research projects for whatever I'm working on is really, really helpful.
Great, thank you. Almost time to go. Before we do that, I have a couple of rapid fire questions for you. No thinking, just answer. Are you morning or night people? Start down the end, Paul.
I'd love to be a morning person, but I'm definitely a night person.
You can just pass it down.
Yeah, same thing. Yeah.
Same thing. Yes. I used to be a night person, and then I had 2 kids, and now it's just all the time.
All right, tie, bow tie, or no tie? Tie, bow tie, or no tie?
Bow tie.
I'm going to have a great tie on later.
Tie.
No tie. I don't.
Used to be no tie, no tie. Last one, Stravinsky, Cage, Reich, or Feldman?
Stravinsky.
Reich. Yeah, I think Reich.
Stravinsky.
Stravinsky.
All right, if there are any more questions? All right, thank you all very much for coming out this morning. Thank you.